Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Naruto awakened the power of a true god. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The mist was a living thing. It clung to the half-finished bones of the great Naruto bridge with a damp, chilling persistence, swallowing sound and sight. It was a shroud for the dead and the dying, a perfect battlefield for the demon of the hidden mist. For Kakashi Hatake, it was a cage. Every drop of moisture seemed to amplify the coppery scent of blood and the suffocating weight of his own dwindling chakra. His hounds, his Niken, had Zabuza Momochi pinned, their fangs dug deep into the man's limbs. But it was a temporary victory, a stalemate purchased with the last dregs of his strength. His vision swam, the three-tomo Sharingan in his left eye burning like a hot coal. He had overused it, pushed it far beyond its limits against a foe who was, in every sense, his equal. Across the bridge, a second, more personal battle raged within a dome of crystalline ice mirrors. He could hear the frantic sounds, the desperate thud of fists against ice, the sharp hiss of saban needles, and the pained cries of his student. Naruto. I've got you, Zabuza, Kakashi rasped, his voice rough. It's over. Zabuza laughed, a low, guttural sound that was half-choked with pain. Over? Don't be a fool, Kakashi. You're running on fumes. And my associate is about to eliminate your other two brats. The only thing that's over is your pathetic attempt to play the hero. As if on cue, a piercing scream echoed from the ice dome, a sound of pure agony that sliced through the mist and directly into Kakashi's heart. Sasuke. The ice dome shattered outwards. Kakashi's head snapped towards the sound, his visible eye wide with horror. He saw Sasuke Uchiha, his last remaining student from the proud Uchiha clan, riddled with saban needles, looking like a grim parody of a pincushion. He stood for a moment, a look of disbelief on his face, before collapsing in a heap on the cold stone. Dead. He looked dead. Sasuke. Naruto's roar was not just a cry of grief. It was a detonation of pure, undiluted rage. It was the sound of a boy who had been alone his entire life, finding a rival, a brother, and then having him ripped away. Kakashi felt a familiar, dreadful surge of malevolent chakra from Naruto's direction. Hot, red, and utterly demonic. The Kyuubi. So, Zabuza grunted, straining against the dogs. The monster finally awakens. This should be interesting. Kakashi's mind raced. He had to end this now. He had to get to Naruto before the seal broke completely, before the Kyuubi's power consumed him. He formed the hand seals for his final, most lethal technique. The air crackled, and a frantic chirping, like 1,000 birds, filled the air. Blue lightning coiled around his right hand, a blade of pure, concentrated chakra. The Chidori. A blade meant for assassination. A blade meant to kill. This ends now, Zabuza! Kakashi yelled, lunging forward. He saw the flicker of surprise in Zabuza's eyes, the recognition of an inescapable attack. This was it. The final move. But the world moved in strange, cruel ways. In the fraction of a second it took for Kakashi's hand to cross the distance, a shadow moved faster. A blur of green and black interposed itself between Kakashi and his target. Haku. Kakashi's eyes, one normal and one spinning with the Sharingan, widened in utter shock. He couldn't stop. The momentum was too great, the jutsu too committed. His hand, sheathed in lightning, plunged forward. Thump. The sound was sickeningly soft. It was not the sound of steel on steel, or even flesh on steel. It was the sound of a life being extinguished. Kakashi's arm had gone straight through Haku's chest, the Chidori's lightning erupting from the boy's back in a chaotic spray. Haku's slender hand weakly grabbed Kakashi's arm, his grip surprisingly firm. Blood, shockingly red against his pale skin, bubbled from his lips. His eyes, wide and dark, found Zabuza's. There was no pain in them. No fear. Only a serene, heartbreakingly pure devotion. Zabuza-sama, your dream. The mist seemed to hold its breath. Zabuza's eyes were wide, the pupils constricted to pinpricks. For the first time since the battle began, his mask of a ruthless demon cracked, revealing a sliver of something utterly human. Shock. Disbelief. And from across the bridge, the roaring volcano of Naruto's rage abruptly went silent. The red, oppressive chakra that had begun to leak from him vanished. The air, which had been thick with killing intent, was suddenly still. Naruto stood over Sasuke's still form, his fists clenched, his head bowed. His spiky blonde hair shadowed his face. Why? The word was a whisper, so quiet it was almost lost in the mournful drip of water from the bridge's steel girders. He looked up, first at Haku's limp body, then at Zabuza's stunned face. His eyes were no longer burning with the Kyuubi's crimson malice. They were their natural, brilliant blue, but they were filled with a sorrow so profound, so ancient, it seemed to belong to the world itself. He was important to you, Naruto said, his voice trembling, not with anger, but with a horrifying, empathetic grief. He had seen it in their interactions. He had heard it in Haku's final words. This boy, this enemy, had died for someone he cherished. Just like Sasuke had, for him. The sheer, pointless tragedy of it all struck Naruto not as a call to vengeance, but as a fundamental, cosmic wrongness. First Sasuke, now you just throw your lives away, for dreams, for tools. He shook his head, tears streaming freely down his whiskered cheeks. No, the word was soft, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. No more. And then it began. It did not start with an explosion. It started with a hum. A low, resonant frequency that seemed to originate not from Naruto, but from the very stones of the bridge, from the water below, from the air itself. Kakashi felt it in his bones, a vibration that had nothing to do with chakra and everything to do with existence. Then came the light. It was not the Kyuubi's violent red. It was not the cool blue of standard chakra. It was the serene, impossible, golden white. It poured out of Naruto not in a torrent, but in a gentle, inexorable wave, like the first rays of dawn cresting a mountain. The light was warm, carrying with it the scent of fresh earth after a spring rain and the feeling of a sun-drenched afternoon. The oppressive mist, Zabuza's greatest weapon, did not just clear. It evaporated. It turned to clean, breathable air in an instant, revealing the entire, blood-soaked span of the bridge under a suddenly clear sky. The oppressive killing intent that had suffocated them all was not just pushed back. It was annihilated, replaced by a profound sense of peace that was so absolute, it was terrifying. Kakashi, his arms still buried in Haku's chest, could only stare. His Sharingan, the legendary copy Will Eye, was failing him for the first time in his life. It was an organ designed to see and analyze the flow of chakra, to deconstruct ninjutsu and genjutsu. But what it was seeing now was not chakra. It was everything. It was a flood of information so immense, so fundamental, that his brain couldn't process it. He saw not a color, but the idea of color. He saw the mathematical formula for life, the blueprint of matter, the very source code of reality, all contained within that gentle, golden white glow. The sheer data overload was agonizing. A sharp, splitting pain lanced through his skull, and his Sharingan involuntarily spun down, the tomo vanishing as his eyelid fluttered shut. He was blind to the phenomenon, forced to rely on his other senses. Zabuza was frozen, his muscles locked. The Niken that held him had released their grip, not out of obedience to Kakashi, but out of a primal, instinctual reverence. They whimpered and lay flat on the bridge, their heads on their paws, utterly pacified. Zabuza, the demon of the mist, a man who had slaughtered his entire graduating class without flinching, felt an emotion he hadn't experienced since he was a small, terrified child. This was not the power of a Jinchuriki. That was a borrowed, hateful force. This was different. This was the power of a tsunami, of an earthquake, of the sunrise itself. It was not a power you fought. It was a power you witnessed. Then, the miracles began. The wave of golden white light washed over Haku's body. Kakashi felt a gentle, irresistible force push his arm out of the boy's chest. He stumbled back, staring at his hand, which was clean. Not a drop of Haku's blood remained on it. He looked at Haku. The gaping, mortal wound in the boy's chest, a wound Kakashi himself had inflicted, was closing. It wasn't healing in the slow, cellular way Tsunade's jutsu might work. The flesh was simply rewriting itself. Torn muscle fibers reknitted, severed arteries seamlessly reconnected, and shattered bone flowed back together like liquid wax. The pale, lifeless skin regained its color, and the entire process, from a fatal wound to unblemished flesh, took less than 3 seconds. There wasn't even a scar. A soft gasp. Haku's chest rose, then fell. His heart, which had been silent, began to beat. It wasn't a weak, fluttering beat. It was a strong, steady, vital rhythm that seemed to echo in the newfound silence of the bridge. Thump thump. Thump thump. A declaration of life against the certainty of death. Zabuza made a choked, strangled sound. He took a staggering step forward, his eyes locked on Haku's stirring form. As he moved, the golden light caressed his arms, the same arms Kakashi's dogs had nearly torn from their sockets. Zabuza felt not a searing pain, but a deep, penetrating warmth, like sinking into a hot spring. He heard a series of soft, wet cracks as the bones in his arms, dislocated and fractured, slid back into their proper places. The torn ligaments and muscles mended themselves in a visible, subcutaneous shimmer. He flexed his fingers, his hands. Perfect. All pain was gone. All weakness was gone. He was whole. The wave of life continued its inexorable, gentle sweep across the bridge. It passed over Sasuke's body, and the boy, who had been teetering on the edge of death, drew a sharp, sudden breath. The Senbon needles that riddled him didn't fall out. They dissolved, turning into motes of harmless light that faded away. His shallow breathing deepened, stabilized. He remained unconscious, but he was no longer dying. But the power was not finished. Its mandate was life, and the bridge was a graveyard of dead, cold steel. The thousands of kunai, shuriken, and broken blades littering the stonework began to vibrate. They lost their metallic sheen, turning a dull, matte gray. Then, with a sound like crumbling stone, they disintegrated. Not into rust, but into fine, dark, nutrient-rich soil that spread across the bridge in a thin, impossible layer. And from that soil, something new grew. Tiny green shoots pushed their way through the dark earth. They unfurled with impossible speed, growing into stems and leaves in the space of a breath. At their tips, buds swelled and then blossomed, thousands of them. Small, impossibly white flowers, each with a faint, luminescent glow at its heart, carpeted the entire length of the bridge. They turned the grim stage of death and violence into a celestial garden. The air filled with their delicate, sweet fragrance. It was at that exact moment that the cavalry of cowards arrived. Gato, the diminutive, greedy shipping magnate, strutted onto the far end of the bridge, flanked by 100-strong army of thugs, bandits, and ronin armed with rusty katanas and crude spears. They had come to clean up the mess, to kill the exhausted shinobi, and take control of the land of waves. They swaggered forward, their laughter and jeers echoing in the unnatural quiet. Well, look what we have here!" Gato sneered, his sunglasses perched on his nose. "Looks like the demon of the mist and the great Kakashi wore each other out. Perfect. Kill them all. Leave no one alive." His thugs let out a ragged cheer and charged forward. They took 3 steps into the field of glowing white flowers and stopped dead. They had come expecting a slaughterhouse. They had walked into a sanctuary. The golden light, though now beginning to fade around Naruto, still lingered in the air, a palpable presence. For minds as simple and base as theirs, driven by greed and violence, this atmosphere of absolute purity was a physical assault. It was like dousing a fire with holy water. Their bloodlust evaporated, replaced by a deep, primal, instinctual terror. This was not the fear of a stronger opponent. This was the fear a sinner feels before an undeniable God. They felt the weight of every life they had ever taken, every coin they had stolen, every cruel act they had ever committed, pressing down on their souls. They looked at the boy, the blonde child from whom this all seemed to emanate, and they didn't see a ninja. They saw a judgment. They began to tremble, their weapons slipping from nerveless fingers. Some fell to their knees. Others turned and fled, screaming in mindless panic, their minds broken by a single glimpse of something their corrupted souls could not endure. Gato stood frozen, his jaw hanging open, his arrogant sneer melted into a mask of slack-jawed horror. He looked at the impossible garden, at the resurrected boy, at the healed ninja, and his materialistic worldview shattered into a million pieces. There was no room for miracles in a world run by money and power. Yet here one was. As the last of the golden light faded, the power finally receded. It flowed back into Naruto, not leaving him, but settling deep within him, like a vast ocean returning to its basin after a high tide. The divine warmth vanished, and the normal, cold sea air rushed back in, feeling profane and harsh by comparison. Naruto's eyes, which had been wide with a sorrow that was not his own, rolled back into his head. His body, having served as a conduit for a power that could rewrite reality, had nothing left. He crumpled forward, collapsing bonelessly onto the flower-strewn stone, his mind a complete and merciful blank. He would not remember the specifics of the light, or the healing, or the flowers. He would only remember a desperate, all-consuming wish for the senseless dying to stop. A heavy silence descended upon the bridge, broken only by the lapping of the waves below and the whimpering of Gato's remaining thugs. "Haku?" Zabuza's voice was a raw, broken whisper. Haku sat up slowly, his movements graceful and fluid. He looked at his own hands, then touched the spot on his chest where Kakashi's lightning-wreathed fist had been moments before. He felt smooth, unbroken skin. He looked at Zabuza, his expression one of profound confusion. "Zabuza-sama. I don't understand," Haku murmured. I know what you were," Zabuza said, his voice thick with an emotion Kakashi had never thought him capable of. He took a step towards Haku, then another, his gaze fixed on the boy he had raised as a tool, as a weapon, and who had just been returned to him by an impossible act of grace. He then turned his gaze from Haku to the terrified Gato, his eyes, visible over his bandages, filled with a new, cold clarity. All the rage, the ambition, the bloodlust that had defined him as the demon of the mist was gone. In its place was something else. A purpose, born from the ashes of his shattered reality. He had been a man who dealt in death. He had just witnessed the antithesis of his entire existence. His contract with Gato, the bridge, the coup, it was all meaningless garbage in the face of what had just happened. A tool is used and discarded. A treasure is protected. Haku, who he had always treated as the former, had just been proven to be the latter, returned to him by a power beyond his comprehension. He owed that power a debt. "Kakashi," Zabuza said, his voice level and devoid of its earlier malice. He didn't even look at the copy ninja. His eyes were fixed on Gato. "The fight is over. The contract is void." He reached up and began to slowly unwind the bandages from his face, revealing his scarred, grim visage. He then reached for the enormous blade strapped to his back, the Kubikurubocho, the executioner's blade. Gato squeaked in terror. "Zabuza! What are you doing? I'm your employer. You work for me." Zabuza let out a short, humorless laugh. "I did. But the terms have changed." He hefted the massive sword, its weight feeling comfortable and familiar, yet its purpose feeling entirely new. "That boy, that child, he showed me something. Something I'd long forgotten." He glanced at Haku, a flicker of genuine affection in his eyes. "He showed me what it means to protect something precious." He turned his full attention back to Gato, a predator who had finally found a truly deserving prey. "And you, Gato, you defile everything you touch. You came here to spit on a miracle." With a speed that defied his size, Zabuza moved. He was a blur of motion, a whirlwind of vengeful steel. The remaining thugs barely had time to scream before the executioner's blade, a sword that grew stronger by drinking the blood of its victims, did its work. It was not a battle. It was a cleansing. Gato tried to run, but Zabuza was upon him in an instant. He grabbed the small man by the collar, lifting him effortlessly into the air. "Please! I'll pay you! Double! Triple!" Gato shrieked, his legs kicking uselessly. "Your money is worthless here," Zabuza said, his voice as cold as the grave. "Your kind has no place in a world where things like this can happen." He didn't give Gato a clean death. He walked him to the edge of the bridge, holding him over the long drop to the swirling waters below. Then, with a final, disgusted look, he simply let go. Gato's scream was cut short by the distant splash. Zabuza stood there for a long moment, the executioner's blade resting on his shoulder. The rising sun was now fully visible, casting a warm glow over the bridge. He looked at the field of white flowers, at Haku, who was now tending to the unconscious Sasuke, and at Naruto, who lay sleeping like a child who had cried himself to exhaustion. Kakashi finally found his voice, though it was strained. Zabuza. Zabuza turned to him. The killing intent was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. Don't worry, Kakashi. I'm not your enemy anymore. I have no fight left in me. Not after this. He gestured vaguely at the entire, impossible scene. We will stay here and ensure no other scum comes to harm the bridge builder. Consider it payment on a debt. Kakashi slowly nodded, his mind still reeling, trying to piece together the sequence of events. Naruto, the Kyuubi hadn't come out. That golden light, that was all him. What was that power? It wasn't ninjutsu. It wasn't genjutsu. It felt divine. The word felt ridiculous, blasphemous even, but no other word fit. He knelt beside Naruto, gently checking his pulse. It was steady, strong. He looked peaceful, innocent. The monster of Konoha. The pariah. The boy who had just performed a miracle that would fundamentally change the world. Sakura and Tazuna, who had watched the entire event from a safe distance in stunned, terrified silence, finally rushed over. Sakura immediately began checking on Sasuke, her medical knowledge confirming what she had seen. He was stable, he was alive. Kakashi looked at the white flower growing near Naruto's hand. He reached out and gently plucked it. It felt real. It smelled real. It was a tangible piece of an impossible event. He tucked it safely into his flak jacket. He would need to report this to the Hokage. But how? How could he possibly explain what he had just witnessed? He looked from his student's sleeping face to the former demon of the mist standing guard, to the resurrected boy tending to his rival, all within a garden of flowers born from weapons of war. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the mission to protect a bridge builder had just become a footnote in history. This was the day the world had changed, and his goofy, knucklehead student, Naruto Uzumaki, was standing at the very center of it. The month that followed the mission in the Land of Waves was, for Konoha, a period of deceptive peace. The bridge was completed, Tazuna was a hero, and a new, vital trade route was secured. Team 7 was lauded for their performance on their first C-rank mission that had spiraled into an A-rank nightmare. Sasuke Uchiha had survived a near-fatal encounter. Sakura Haruno had shown courage, and Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto was the hero who had defeated a powerful foe. That was the official story. The truth was far more complex, and it sat like a lead weight in Kakashi Hataki's stomach. He stood in the Hokage's office, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the room cluttered with towers of paperwork. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and Lord Third's pipe smoke. In his hand, Kakashi held a small, sealed scroll containing his full, unedited report. The official version was already filed away. This was the one that kept him awake at night. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage, sat behind his desk, looking every one of his 69 years. He drew on his pipe, his wise old eyes fixed on Kakashi, betraying nothing of his thoughts. Your official report was exemplary, Kakashi, Sarutobi said, his voice a low rumble. But your request for a private audience, and the look on your face, tells me the scrolls do not contain the entire story. Kakashi placed the scroll on the desk. Lord Third, what happened on that bridge? I don't have the words to properly document it. I'm not sure they exist. He began to recount the events, his voice low and strained. He described the moment Haku sacrificed himself, the Chidori piercing the boy's chest. He described Naruto's rage, the familiar, terrible surge of the Nine-Tails chakra. But then his narrative shifted, and then it just stopped, Kakashi said, shaking his head as if to clear it. The red chakra vanished. It was replaced by something else. A light. A golden white light. He struggled to find the right words. It wasn't a jutsu. It felt fundamental. The air became calm. The killing intent we'd all been drowning in was just gone. Erased. Sarutobi leaned forward, his pipe forgotten. His gaze was sharp, intense. What did your Sharingan see, Kakashi? Kakashi flinched, a phantom pain shooting through his left eye. That's the problem, sir. It saw too much. It wasn't seeing a flow of chakra. It was like looking at the source code for the universe. The formulas for life, for matter, for light itself. It was a flood of pure information my mind couldn't process. It nearly burned out my eye. He reached into his flak jacket and carefully pulled out a small, glass vial. Inside, perfectly preserved, was a single, luminous white flower. He placed it on the desk next to the scroll. The weapons on the bridge, kunai, shuriken, Zabaz's broken sword, they turned to dust. And from that dust these grew. All over the bridge. This was growing next to Naruto's head when he collapsed. Sarutobi picked up the vial, holding it up to the light. His eyes, which had seen all the horrors and wonders the shinobi world had to offer, widened fractionally. He didn't need a sensor type to feel it. The flower radiated a faint, pure energy that had no analog. It was not of the world, yet it was the most living thing he had ever seen. And Haku? The Hokage asked, his voice barely a whisper. Dead, Kakashi stated, the word tasting like ash. I killed him. My hand went through his heart. There is no doubt. And that light, it brought him back. It didn't just heal him, Lord Third. It remade him. The wound was gone. Not a scar. Zabaz's broken arms were mended in an instant. Sasuke's fatal-looking wounds were stabilized. And Naruto. Naruto remembers none of it. Only the anger and the grief. Sarutobi set the vial down with a hand that trembled slightly. He stared at the flower for a long, silent minute. The gears of his ancient mind were turning, sifting through decades of secrets, of forbidden lore. The Uzumaki clan was known for their formidable life force and sealing jutsu, but this was beyond anything he had ever heard. Kushina had been a force of nature, but she had never rewritten reality. This power, Sarutobi said finally, his voice grave. It was triggered by his desire to save someone, to stop the killing? Yes, Kakashi confirmed. It seemed to be a direct response to his grief. He wanted Haku and Zabuza to not be gone, to not have their lives thrown away. It was a child's wish given the power of a god. A god. Sarutobi murmured, the word hanging in the air like a death sentence. We will say nothing of this. The official report stands. But from now on, Kakashi, your true highest priority mission is to observe Naruto Uzumaki. Document everything, no matter how small or insignificant it seems. A power like this, if he cannot control it, or if others learn of it, Konoha could become the cradle of a new world, or its grave. Naruto, for his part, was oblivious to the gravity of the change within him. He was just Naruto. Loud, boisterous, and single-mindedly focused on two things, ramen, and the upcoming Chunin exams. He was determined to show everyone, especially Sasuke, how strong he'd become. Yet things were weird. Little oddities that tugged at the edge of his perception, moments of strangeness he couldn't quite explain. The first was his houseplant. It was a sad, scraggly little thing a neighbor had given him, which he usually forgot to water. One evening, after a particularly grueling training session, he noticed it was brown and drooping, its leaves brittle. A pang of guilt hit him. Ah man, sorry buddy, he muttered, pouring a glass of water into its pot. Hang in there. He went to bed and thought no more of it. When he woke the next morning, the plant was a vibrant, shocking green. Its leaves were lush and waxy, and a single, perfect white flower, a flower he had never seen before, had bloomed at its peak. He stared at it, scratching his head. Huh. Guess it was just really thirsty. The second occurrence was during sparring with Kiba Inuzuka. Kiba was fast, Akamaru was faster, and Naruto was taking a beating. In a frantic exchange, Kiba's kunai slipped, catching Naruto's forearm. It was a shallow but long cut, blood welling up instantly. Whoa, sorry, Naruto! Kiba yelled, pulling back. It's fine. I'm fine. Naruto shouted, shaking his arm. The Kyuubi's influence always healed him quickly, the skin knitting together over a few minutes, usually leaving a faint pink line that would fade by the next day. But this was different. He glanced down at his arm a few seconds later to wipe away the blood, and his hand came away clean. There was no cut, no blood, no scar. The skin was smooth and unbroken, as if the injury had never happened. Whoa, how'd you do that? Kiba asked, his eyes wide. Akamaru barked in confusion. Super fast healing. Yeah, Naruto said, striking a triumphant pose, though inside, a seed of confusion was planted. That was too fast. Even for him. The third was the most unsettling. He was walking to the academy to register for the exams, his mind buzzing with excitement. As he passed under a second-story window, an inexplicable urge seized him. His feet moved on their own, a quick, sharp sidestep to the right. A split second later, a heavy ceramic pot, knocked over by a cat, crashed onto the exact spot where his head had been, shattering into 100 pieces. Naruto stared at the wreckage, his heart pounding. He hadn't heard it fall. He hadn't seen it. He had just moved. It was a whisper of instinct, a premonition that felt less like a thought, and more like the world itself nudging him out of the way. He shook his head, chalking it up to a lucky fluke, and hurried on his way, the strange, unsettled feeling lingering. These were the whispers of the Genesis Mandate, the planet's latent consciousness stirring within its chosen vessel. It was a power that cherished life, and it was beginning to passively nurture and protect the life it was entwined with. The second stage of the Chunin exams was a survival test held in the 44th Training Ground, a place better known as the Forest of Death. And it lived up to its name. The air was a suffocating blanket of humidity, buzzing with the sound of insects the size of his fist. The trees were gargantuan, their canopy so thick it blotted out the sun, casting the forest floor in a perpetual, eerie twilight. Team 7 had acquired an Earth Scroll and were searching for a team with a Heaven Scroll. They were on edge, weary, and soaked in sweat. I have a really bad feeling about this place, Sakura said, clutching a kunai so tightly her knuckles were white. Don't be a wimp, Sakura, Sasuke scoffed, his Sharingan active, scanning the oppressive gloom. Just stay alert. He's right. We'll find a scroll in no time, believe it! Naruto declared, though even his bravado was muted by the forest's palpable menace. That was when the wind stopped. The constant drone of insects ceased. The rustle of leaves died away. An absolute, profound silence fell over their section of the forest. And with the silence came a pressure, a malevolent force that felt like the very air was turning to poison. Sakura gasped, her eyes wide with terror as she was hit by the full force of the killing intent. Her mind was flooded with 100 different images of her own brutal, bloody death. She was paralyzed, unable to even scream. Sasuke grunted, falling to one knee. His Sharingan gave him some resistance, but it was a fight he was losing. He saw visions of his clan's massacre, of Itachi's cold eyes, his own body lying among the dead. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead. Naruto felt it too, a wave of pure malice and bloodlust that promised annihilation. The Kyuubi within him snarled, its hateful chakra flaring in response to the challenge. But before the red energy could leak out, something else rose to meet the threat. It was the golden white power. The Genesis Mandate. It didn't surge. It didn't explode. It simply was. Like a lighthouse cutting through a storm, it created a pocket of reality around Naruto that refused to be corrupted. The suffocating pressure of the killing intent hit an invisible, inviolable barrier and dissipated. Within a 10-foot radius of Naruto, the air suddenly became clean and light. The oppressive humidity eased, replaced by the pleasant warmth of a sunny glade. The scent of decay and damp earth was overwritten by the faint, fresh smell of blooming flowers and clean soil. It was a sanctuary of life in the heart of death. From the high branches of a massive tree, a figure observed them, a long, serpentine tongue flicking out to taste the air. Orochimaru. His slit-pupiled, golden eyes narrowed. He was a master of killing intent. He could make a Kage flinch with a mere glance. To see these genin, particularly the Uchiha, resisting was impressive. But the Uzumaki boy, he wasn't resisting. He seemed utterly unaffected. More than that, the very space around him was actively nullifying Orochimaru's power. Fascinating, Orochimaru thought, a cold, scientific curiosity overriding his predatory instincts. The Jinchuriki's demonic chakra should be reacting violently, clashing with my own. But this is not the energy of the Nine Tails. This is orderly. It is pure. What is this phenomenon? He dropped from the tree, landing silently before them. My, he hissed, his voice a silken rasp that made Sakura's blood run cold. What interesting little leaves I've found. Sasuke forced himself to his feet, positioning himself in front of Sakura. Naruto! Get ready! Naruto was staring at the newcomer, his blue eyes wide. He wasn't paralyzed by fear like his teammates. The sanctuary of his own power protected him from the worst of the psychic assault, but he could feel the wrongness of this person. It was like looking at a rot, a disease given human form. The power inside him, the gentle gardener, recoiled from the walking plague. Who are you? Naruto demanded, his voice tight. Just a traveler, hoping to see if the rumors about the Uchiha prodigy are true, Orochimaru said, his gaze fixed on Sasuke. But his senses, honed by decades of forbidden experiments, were focused on Naruto. He could feel it now, a subtle aura of pure life force, an energy that should not exist in this impure world. The confrontation was brutal and terrifyingly one-sided. Orochimaru moved like a phantom, his attacks a blur. He toyed with Sasuke, his grace and power making the Uchiha's prodigious talent look like a child's tantrum. He swallowed their heaven scroll with a flick of his long tongue, a gesture of ultimate contempt. You are weak, Sasuke-kun, Orochimaru hissed, appearing behind him. You lack hatred. Your brother was a true genius. You are but a pale imitation. The words struck home. Sasuke roared in frustration and charged, only to be caught and slammed into a tree. Sasuke! Naruto yelled, his protective instincts overriding everything else. He formed a dozen shadow clones, and they swarmed Orochimaru. The Sannin dispatched them with contemptuous ease, his body twisting and contorting in unnatural ways. He was a snake, and they were mice. But as he fought, he kept brushing against the edge of Naruto's protective aura. Each time, he felt a strange, cleansing sensation, as if a layer of filth was being wiped from his soul. It was disgusting. It was intoxicating. He finally appeared before Naruto, his golden eyes burning with a feverish light. And you, Naruto-kun, the vessel of the Nine Tails. You have a fascinating little secret, don't you? Before Naruto could react, Orochimaru struck. He wasn't the target. Sasuke was. With blinding speed, Orochimaru stretched his neck to an impossible length, his head shooting past Naruto like a striking viper. His fangs, long and sharp, sank into Sasuke's neck. Sasuke screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated agony as Orochimaru's corrupted chakra, the prototype curse mark, was injected directly into his system. Black, tomo-like markings spread from the bite wound, coiling around his neck like a venomous serpent. Seeing Sasuke scream, seeing that dark, foul pattern spreading across his skin, broke something in Naruto. It was the bridge all over again. A precious person, his rival, his friend, being hurt, being tainted, right in front of him. The Kyuubi surged, a tidal wave of red-hot hatred. Let me out! I will tear him apart. No! Naruto's own screamed back, a conscious denial born from the horror he felt at the thought of losing control. He wouldn't become a monster. Not to save Sasuke. There had to be another way. His rage, his desperation, his overwhelming desire to fix this, latched onto the other power within him. The Genesis Mandate. The golden white light didn't just leak out, it blazed. It wasn't the gentle dawn of the bridge, it was the focused, searing intensity of a solar flare. It shot from Naruto not as a wave, but as a lance of pure, concentrated will. He didn't know any complex jutsu. He didn't have a plan. He just lunged forward, his hand outstretched, aiming for the ugly black mark that was poisoning his friend. Orochimaru, having withdrawn his neck, watched with rapt attention. He expected the Kyuubi's chakra, a force he knew well. What he saw instead made his black heart pound with ecstatic revelation. Naruto's hand, glowing with a light that seemed to hum with the song of creation, hovered over Sasuke's neck. The curse mark, a seal fueled by Orochimaru's senjutsu-laced and deeply corrupt chakra, reacted as if doused in acid. The black markings writhed and hissed, trying to burrow deeper into Sasuke's flesh, but the golden light pressed down upon it. It wasn't a battle of power levels. It was a battle of concepts. Orochimaru's mark was a symbol of corruption, of selfish power gained through sacrifice, a perversion of nature. Naruto's light was a symbol of purity, of life, of creation itself. It was the source code fighting of Iris. The black of the curse mark sizzled, and for a glorious, impossible moment, it began to recede. The golden light pushed it back, not destroying it, but purifying the corrupted chakra, transmuting its malice into neutral energy. The rampant spread was instantly halted. The spiritual wound that Orochimaru had inflicted was cauterized, the poison contained. Naruto's power was not strong enough, not focused enough, to erase the mark entirely. He was just a child, an unconscious wielder of a cosmic force. But he had done the impossible. He had wounded a concept. He had purified a piece of Orochimaru's very soul. The backlash was immense. Naruto cried out as the raw power receded, the effort leaving him dizzy and gasping. He stumbled back, his vision swimming. Orochimaru wasn't looking at the unconscious Sasuke anymore. His gaze was fixed solely on Naruto, and his face was a mask of manic, religious fervor. The Sharingan was a bauble. Immortality through vessel transference was a crude, temporary solution. But this was the ultimate answer. He had spent his life searching for a way to master all jutsu, to live forever, to understand the very fabric of existence. He had used science, forbidden techniques, and defied the natural order, and here, in a bratty, knucklehead Jinchuriki, was the power he had only dreamed of. The power to create life. The power to define reality. The power of a true god. To steal the Sharingan would make him a master shinobi. To steal this power would make him Genesis itself. Incredible, Orochimaru breathed, his voice trembling with a lust far greater than any he had ever felt for a jutsu or a new body. He licked his lips, his mind already racing with 1,000 new, blasphemous experiments. The Uchiha is a fine prize, a wonderful new toy. He gave Naruto a chilling, proprietary smile. But you, Naruto-kun, you are a sacred text. And I will spend an eternity deciphering you. With a final, lingering look, he melted into the shadows of the forest, his quiet laughter echoing behind him. His objective had not just changed, it had evolved into a holy crusade. Naruto fell to his knees, panting, the adrenaline leaving him shaky and weak. He crawled over to Sasuke, who was unconscious, his face pale and contorted in pain, but the angry black markings on his neck were quiescent, dormant. Sakura, finally free from the killing intent, scrambled over to them. Sasuke-kun! Naruto! What was that? Who was that? Naruto didn't have an answer. He just looked at his own trembling hands, a profound and terrifying question beginning to form in the back of his mind. What was that? When Anko Mitarashi and her team of proctors found them, they found a scene of chaos. An unconscious Uchiha bearing a mark that made Anko's own curse mark burn in sympathy. A terrified, weeping Haruno, and a confused, exhausted Uzumaki, sitting silently amidst a small patch of grass where the moss and grime of the forest floor had been replaced by a circle of tiny, immaculate white flowers that glowed with a faint, inner light. Anko stared at the scene, a deep sense of dread coiling in her gut. The Chunin exams had just taken a very dark turn. The month between the preliminary matches and the final round of the Chunin exams was a strange, liminal time for Team 7. Konoha buzzed with a nervous energy, a mixture of festival excitement and the underlying tension of hosting so many foreign shinobi. For Naruto, it was a month of deep, gnawing unease that even Jiraiya's eccentric training methods couldn't entirely dispel. Sasuke was back on his feet, but he was a ghost haunting his own body. The curse mark on his neck, a trio of black tomo, was a silent, ugly promise. After Naruto's unconscious intervention in the forest, the seal had become dormant, its rampant corruption halted. The medics were baffled. They had expected a raging, chakra-devouring infection, but instead found a contained, sleeping poison. Sasuke was colder now, more distant, his obsession with strength having found a new, dark focal point. The bond between him and Naruto, once a taut line of rivalry and begrudging respect, now felt frayed and fragile. Naruto found himself staring at his own hands a lot. He remembered the blinding light, the feeling of something immense and pure moving through him in the forest of death. He remembered wanting to fix the ugly mark on Sasuke. He didn't understand what he had done, only that it had worked, and that the memory of it felt both wonderful and terrifying. Kakashi had questioned him about it, his single visible eye searching Naruto's face with an intensity that made him squirm. Naruto, that energy you used against Orochimaru, it wasn't the Nine Tails, was it? Kakashi had asked, his tone carefully neutral. I dunno. I was just mad. I wanted to help Sasuke. Naruto had deflected, his voice louder than necessary. To admit he didn't know was to admit something was happening to him that he couldn't control, and that was a fear he wasn't ready to face. The little white flowers were the most tangible proof. He kept finding them. One morning, a small, perfect blossom was sitting on his windowsill, dew clinging to its luminescent petals. Another time, after he tripped and scraped his knee, he found one growing in the crack of the pavement where he had fallen. They were like quiet footnotes to a story he couldn't read, reminders of the miracle on the bridge and the strange power that now slept within him. But the exams were a perfect distraction, and the preliminary matches had arrived with a jolt of reality. Standing in the arena, watching the names flicker on the electronic board, Naruto felt a familiar thrill. This was his chance to prove himself. Kiba Inuzuka vs. Naruto Uzumaki. Kiba grinned, a feral, confident smirk. Looks like I got the lucky draw, Akamaru. We'll finish this loser off in 5 minutes. The little white dog on his head barked in agreement. You wish, dog breath. Naruto shot back, his own bravado a comfortable shield. I'm gonna wipe that stupid look right off your face. The fight was a chaotic whirlwind of fur, claws, and shadow clones. Kiba and Akamaru were a perfectly synchronized unit, their 4 legs jutsu turning them into a speeding, drilling vortex of destruction. Naruto was overwhelmed, his clones being ripped to shreds as he dodged and weaved, desperately trying to find an opening. Kiba, temporarily transformed into a more bestial version of himself, cornered him. It's over, Naruto. Tunneling Fong. He and Akamaru spun into 2 identical, high-speed drills, tearing up the arena floor as they converged on Naruto from 2 directions. There was no escape. Naruto braced himself for the impact, a familiar frustration welling up in him. He wasn't angry at Kiba. He was just tired of being weak, of being cornered. His gaze flickered from the snarling, feral Kiba to the spinning form of Akamaru. He didn't see a weapon. He saw a dog. Kiba's partner. Kiba's friend. An unconscious thought, purer than any strategy, bloomed in his mind. I don't want to hurt him. I just wish he'd stop. It was a simple, childish desire, but it was connected to a power that could move mountains. A subtle, invisible pulse of the Genesis mandate emanated from Naruto. It wasn't a light show, not a wave of force. It was a conceptual broadcast. It was a feeling. For Akamaru, spinning through the air in a blur of chakra and instinct, the world suddenly changed. One moment, his senses were filled with the thrill of the hunt, the scent of his target's ozone-like chakra, and the familiar, aggressive energy of his master. The next, a new sensation washed over him. It was a feeling of pure, uncomplicated friendship. It smelled like sunshine on a warm patch of grass. It felt like a kind hand scratching that perfect spot behind his ears. It was the feeling of safety, of camaraderie, of belonging to a pack, and it was coming from his target. The dog's predatory instincts slammed into this wall of overwhelming affection and shattered. Confusion warred with ingrained training. A distressed whine escaped his throat, and his spinning form faltered, wobbling out of its trajectory. He landed in a heap, shaking his head, looking at Naruto not with aggression, but with utter bewilderment. Akamaru! What are you doing? Kiba yelled, his own attack thrown off balance by his partner's sudden stop. He skidded to a halt, staring at his dog. What's wrong with you? Up in the stands, Kakashi leaned forward, his eye narrowed. He had felt it, a flicker of that same serene, orderly energy from the bridge. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, but its effect was clear. Naruto didn't understand what had happened, but he recognized an opening when he saw one. He burst from his corner, a grin splitting his face. He'd learned a thing or two from watching Sasuke. You're wide open, he yelled. Lions, no, wait. Uzumaki combo. A swift kick launched Kiba into the air, followed by a barrage of shadow clones pummeling him from all sides, culminating in a final, decisive axe kick that slammed him into the floor. Hate Gecko, The proctor coughed into his hand before raising it. The winner is Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto cheered, striking a pose for the stunned crowd. He had won. He was moving on to the finals. He glanced over at Akamaru, who was now licking a dazed Kiba's face, still letting out the occasional confused yip. Naruto just grinned. Lucky break, he figured. 1 month later, the sun beat down on the massive stadium packed to the rafters with cheering civilians and stoic shinobi from every nation. The final round was a spectacle, and Naruto's first match was against the one person everyone considered an untouchable genius, Neji Hyuga. Neji stood across the field, his posture perfect, his face a mask of serene superiority. His pale, lavender eyes, the Byakugan, seemed to look right through Naruto, dismissing him as an insignificant obstacle on the path to his inevitable victory. To think that a failure like you could make it this far, Neji said, his voice carrying easily across the silent arena. It's a testament to how luck can sometimes favor the undeserving, but this is where your luck runs out. A person's destiny is sealed at birth. A failure will always be a failure. That is the inescapable truth of this world. His words were like ice picks, aimed at the deepest insecurities Naruto had carried his whole life. The crowd murmured. Even from the stands, the sheer weight of Neji's confidence was palpable. We'll see about that. Naruto yelled back, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. The fight began, and it was a massacre. Neji was a force of nature, a prodigy in a way that even Sasuke wasn't. His movements were fluid, precise, and utterly flawless. He moved like water, flowing around Naruto's clumsy, straightforward attacks. His gentle fist style was terrifying. It wasn't about breaking bones. It was about destroying the body from the inside. 8 trigrams, 2 palms. 4 palms. 8 palms. 16. 32. Neji's hands were a blur, striking Naruto's tenketsu with pinpoint accuracy. Naruto felt his chakra flows seize up, the energy pathways damming and sputtering like a clogged pipe. He stumbled back, gasping, his limbs feeling heavy and unresponsive. It's useless, Neji stated calmly, standing perfectly still. I can see all 361 of your chakra points. You are within my divination. I have already foreseen your defeat. He then delivered the final, crippling blow. 8 trigrams, 64 palms. The barrage was too fast to see. Naruto was struck again and again, each precise tap sending a jolt of agony through him as his chakra network was systematically shut down. He collapsed onto the grass, paralyzed and broken. The Hokage, the Jounin, your teammates, they all fill your head with nonsense about hard work and willpower, Neji continued, his voice dripping with a cold, intellectual cruelty. He pointed to the curse seal mark visible on his own forehead. But some are born with a seal that can never be removed. Some are born into the branch family, destined to protect the main family. Some are born failures, destined to be defeated by geniuses. That is fate. Stop struggling against it. Your destiny was to lose to me here today. Lying there, every part of his body screaming, Naruto felt a familiar despair creep in. Maybe Neji was right. Maybe he was just a loser who got lucky. He thought of Sasuke, so far ahead of him. He thought of the villagers' hateful stares. Then, he thought of Hinata, her face contorted in pain after her match with Neji, whispering you can do it, Naruto-kun. He thought of Iruka-sensei giving him his headband. He thought of Haku, dying for someone he loved. He thought of the bridge, of the feeling of wanting to save someone so badly that the world itself bent to his will. A different kind of energy began to stir. Not the hot, hateful rage of the Kyuubi. This was something deep and defiant. It was the will to live. The will to prove them all wrong. He pushed himself up, his body trembling with the effort. Don't you dare tell me what my destiny is, he growled, forcing himself to his feet. As he spoke, something shifted in the arena. It wasn't visible, but it was tangible. The Genesis mandate, the power of life and potential, resonated with his indomitable will. It didn't manifest as light, but as an aura, a conceptual broadcast that washed over the entire stadium. The air grew still and clear. The roar of the crowd quieted to a hushed reverence. Every single person in the stadium, from the Hokage to the ramen vendor in the top row, felt a sudden, inexplicable sense of clarity. A jaded shinobi who had seen too much war felt a forgotten spark of idealism. A young merchant worrying about his finances felt a surge of confidence that he could overcome his troubles. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated hope. Niji felt it most acutely. It was a warmth that pushed back against the cold certainty of his philosophy. It felt like a crack forming in a flawless diamond. The feeling was alien and infuriating. "I'll never go back on my word," Naruto declared, his voice ringing with an unnatural resonance. "Because that's my nindo. My ninja way." His words weren't just a catchphrase. They were a decree. In that moment, they carried the weight of a prophet's sermon. People weren't just hearing a boy's promise. They were feeling the fundamental truth of perseverance in their own souls. Hinata, in the stands, felt the wave of Naruto's will like a physical touch, a validation of her own quiet belief in him that brought tears to her eyes. "Words are meaningless," Niji roared, his composure finally breaking. He charged, determined to silence this infuriating anomaly. But Naruto wasn't just a loser anymore. He was a vessel for the idea that destiny could be rewritten. He tapped into the Kyuubi's chakra, and this time, it was different. The raw, red energy was infused with a faint golden sheen. It was no longer just the chakra of a demon. It was the fury of a god, a righteous, world-shaking anger directed at the very concept of predestination. He and Niji clashed in the center of the arena, a battle of gentle fist against raw, untamable power. They fell into the crater Naruto had made, and when they emerged, it was Naruto who burst from the ground, a clone propelling him upward. He flew at Niji, his fist cocked back. It was more than a punch. It was a physical argument against fatalism. It was the embodiment of his entire life struggle. The uppercut connected with a thunderous crack, sending Niji flying. As Niji lay defeated, Naruto stood over him, not with triumph, but with understanding. "You talk about a seal you can't remove, about being a failure," he said, his voice calm now. "Sometimes, you just need someone to tell you it's not true." The words, backed by the lingering aura of the mandate, broke through Niji's defenses completely. The rigid philosophy that had been his cage for years shattered. He looked up at the failure who had defeated him, and for the first time, he saw not a loser, but a possibility. A different destiny. The celebration was short-lived. Just as Sasuke's match was about to begin, the sky filled with the illusion of falling feathers, and the Konoha crush began. The invasion was chaos and fire. Naruto, jolted into action by Sakura, was tasked by Kakashi with a single, vital mission: find Sasuke and back him up. "Go!" He pursued the fleeing sand siblings, catching up just in time to see Sasuke, exhausted and drained by his use of the Chidori and the curse mark, pinned against a tree by Gaara of the desert. But this was not the quiet, brooding Gaara from the exams. This was a monster. His body was partially transformed, sand cracking from his skin, one arm a grotesque, oversized claw. A long, sandy tail lashed behind him, and half of his face was a caricature of Shikaku, the one-tailed beast, with a wild, yellow eye and a manic, slitted grin. "I will kill you, Sasuke Uchiha!" Gaara cackled, his voice a horrifying duet of a boy and a demon. "I will feel alive as I crush you. My existence will not be denied. Get away from him!" Naruto yelled, landing between them. He looked into Gaara's eyes, one human and filled with a pain so deep it was bottomless, the other bestial and filled with bloodlust. And in that moment, Naruto saw a reflection. He saw another boy who had been feared, hated, and treated like a monster. He saw a loneliness that dwarfed his own. His objective, set by a power far older than himself, shifted. He wasn't here to win a fight. He was here to save a soul. The battle that followed was titanic. Gaara's power was immense, a tidal wave of sand that crushed trees and reshaped the forest. Naruto summoned Chief Toad Gamabunta, and the fight became a clash of monsters, a page torn from an ancient myth. But something else was happening on a level no one could see. Every time Gamabunta's blade clashed with Gaara's sand, every time Naruto's chakra-infused kunai struck the sand shield, a minuscule, almost undetectable amount of the Genesis Mandate's energy bled through. It was a drop of pure water in a polluted ocean. For Gaara, it was maddening. His entire life, The only voice in his head besides his own had been Shikaku's, a constant, hateful screech demanding blood and destruction. Now there was something else. It wasn't a voice. It was a feeling. A flicker of warmth in the cold emptiness. The memory of a shared meal he'd never had. The feeling of a hand on his head, not in anger, but in comfort. These alien sensations were a counter-melody to Shikaku's song of madness, and they terrified him more than any physical attack. He unleashed more of Shikaku's power, allowing the beast to manifest completely. The giant, Santanuki, rose from the forest, roaring its hatred to the heavens. Naruto and Gamabunta performed the combination transformation, becoming a colossal nine-tailed fox to match it. As they clung to the beast, Naruto's divine chakra, amplified by his Seijin training potential, flowed outward. It created an empathic link. Gaara, locked in his sphere of sand, was suddenly flooded with images, with feelings. He didn't just see Naruto's past, he experienced it. He felt the sting of a shopkeeper's glare. He felt the cold emptiness of an apartment with no one to welcome him home. He felt the ache of watching other children play from a lonely swing set. It was his own life, mirrored in another. But then came the part that broke him. Flowing back through that same link, from Naruto to him, was not pity. It was not condescension. It was a wave of pure, absolute empathy. It was a feeling that whispered, I know. I know how much it hurts. You don't have to be alone anymore. It was a kindness so profound, so unexpected, it was more painful than any wound. The battle reached its crescendo. Gamabunta held the sand beast down. Naruto, bloody and battered, gathered the last of his strength and charged. This was it. His final gambit. He propelled himself forward and slammed his forehead directly against Gaara's. Crack. It wasn't just a headbutt. It was the closing of a circuit. It was the moment of direct, perfect contact. The full, undiluted power of the Genesis mandate, guided by Naruto's desperate desire to reach the boy inside the monster, flooded into Gaara. It was not an attack. It was a cleansing. A torrent of warm, golden-white light poured into the deepest, darkest, most wounded corners of Gaara's soul. It didn't erase his painful memories, but it washed them clean of their poison. It was the warmth of 1,000 suns burning away the infection of a lifetime of hatred and fear. It was a hand reaching into the abyss and pulling him back. The power even washed over the raging consciousness of Shikaku. The tailed beast, a creature defined by the hatred and fear of the humans who had sealed it, had never encountered an energy like this. It was not the oppressive force of a seal, or the hateful energy of a battle. It was calm. It was life. It was peace. The beast's centuries-old rage was not conquered, it was soothed. The storm in its heart quieted, and with a final, confused roar, its sandy form crumbled. Naruto and Gaara fell from the sky, crashing onto a large branch, both utterly spent. They lay there, panting, surrounded by the wreckage of their battle. Gaara stared at Naruto, his eyes, now both human, filled with a dawning horror and a sliver of impossible hope. He remembered Yashimaru's betrayal, his father's assassination attempts. But now, those memories were juxtaposed with the overwhelming feeling of empathy he had just received. Why? Gaara rasped. Why would you do this, for me? Because you're the same as me, Naruto said, his voice weak but firm. When they look at you, and they look at me, their eyes are the same. But to have your friends and the people you care about, that's what saves you from that loneliness. Temari and Kankuro arrived, ready to defend their brother, but they stopped, stunned by the scene. Gaara looked at his siblings, then back at Naruto. The words he spoke next were not just for them. They were an apology to the world, a plea to the boy who had just saved him from himself. I'm sorry. Naruto managed a weak, triumphant grin. He had done it. He had gotten through. He had faced a monster and found a friend. He didn't know that his simple act of empathy had been amplified into a soul-healing miracle. He didn't know that he had soothed the tailed beast with kindness. He only knew that he had forged a new, unbreakable bond, not with jutsu or with force, but with the simple, earth-shaking power of understanding. And as he finally succumbed to exhaustion, he felt a deep, profound peace. He was finally beginning to understand what it meant to be strong. The funeral rites for the third Hokage cast a pall over Konoha that even the summer sun could not dispel. The sky wept a miserable, gray drizzle, mirroring the tears on 1,000 faces. Naruto stood amongst the crowd, a black band on his arm, the ache in his heart a dull, hollow thing. The old man who had looked past the demon, who had given him his silly apartment and his monthly allowance, who had occasionally shared a knowing smile, he was gone, killed by Orochimaru, the pale-faced monster from the forest. The name was a curse on Naruto's lips, a symbol of a deep, personal rot in the world that he now felt responsible for. It was in this somber atmosphere that Jiraiya, the Toad Sage, one of the legendary Sannin, re-entered Naruto's life. He appeared with a theatrical puff of smoke and a lecherous grin that was wildly out of place, declaring he would train Naruto while they searched for the only other person qualified to be the next Hokage, Tsunade Senju, the third and final Sannin. Naruto, desperate for a way to get stronger, to avenge the third, to one day drag Sasuke back from the brink, agreed instantly. He had no idea that Jiraiya's interest in him went far beyond his status as the fourth Hokage's legacy. Jiraiya was a man of immense experience, a spy master whose goofy persona was a carefully crafted mask. He had received Kakashi's full, unedited report via a Toad summons before Sarutobi's death. The words had chilled him to the bone. Genesis. Rewriting reality. A power beyond the Kyuubi. He had initially dismissed it as Kakashi's grief-stricken hyperbole. But then he met Naruto, and he began to see the truth for himself. Their first training session took place by a quiet river miles from the village. Jiraiya's goal was simple, to teach Naruto to harness the Kyuubi's chakra consciously, not just in moments of blind rage. "All right, brat," Jiraiya said, crossing his arms. "I'm going to release a tiny fraction of the seal's hold. I want you to draw on the fox's power, just enough to walk on water." Naruto, who had already mastered this skill, gave him a confused look. "But pervy sage, I can already do that." "Not like this, you can't. I want you to use the other chakra. The red stuff." Naruto focused, concentrating on the anger he felt towards Orochimaru, towards Gaara, towards every enemy he'd ever faced. He felt the familiar, hot bubbling in his gut as the Kyuubi's power began to stir. A faint red aura flickered around his feet as he stepped onto the water's surface. Jiraiya's eyes narrowed. He wasn't just watching Naruto. He was analyzing. His senses, honed by decades of mastering sage jutsu, were extended to their absolute limit. He felt the Kyuubi's chakra, chaotic, malevolent, a raw, untamed force of nature. But underneath it, woven into it, was something else. A faint, golden-white filigree. It was serene, orderly, and humming with a quiet power that made the Kyuubi's rage feel like a child's tantrum in comparison. It was exactly as Kakashi had described. "More," Jiraiya ordered. "Give me more." Naruto gritted his teeth, pulling on the power. The red aura intensified, and the water around his feet began to hiss and steam. But as the red grew stronger, so did the golden white, acting like a container, a framework that gave the chaotic energy a semblance of structure. This was Jiraiya's first clue. The Kyuubi's power wasn't just leaking. It was being managed. To confirm his suspicion, Jiraiya decided to push it. He made a complex series of hand seals, then slapped a palm onto Naruto's stomach, right over the fourth Hokage's seal. "Hold still, kid. Just a little diagnostic." It wasn't a diagnostic. It was a custom-made monitoring seal, a masterpiece of Jiraiya's own design. It wasn't meant to suppress or release anything. It was designed to act like a metaphysical voltmeter, to measure the output and nature of any chakra passing through the primary seal. It was a tool to quantify the impossible. The seal flared with blue light as it settled onto Naruto's abdomen. "Okay," Jiraiya said, stepping back, his senses now focused entirely on his new creation. "Now I want you to think about the fight on the bridge. Think about Haku. Think about what you wanted in that moment." Naruto's expression softened. The anger faded, replaced by a deep, sorrowful empathy. He remembered Haku's devotion, the pointless tragedy of his death. He remembered his desperate, childish wish for the dying to just stop. "I just wanted him to be okay." The thought, pure and simple, was the key. The monitoring seal on Naruto's stomach, designed to handle the raging output of a tailed beast, flashed once, violently. A spider web of incandescent cracks spread across its surface, and a wisp of smoke curled from its center. Jiraiya jerked his head back as if he'd been slapped, his eyes wide with disbelief. The seal had nearly shattered. It had been subjected to a pulse of energy so dense, so pure, and so fundamentally different from chakra that its intricate formulas had begun to unravel. It was like trying to measure the brightness of the sun with a cheap thermometer. The brief pulse had registered not as a measure of power, but as a statement of fact. A command. And the seal, a construct of rules and logic, had buckled under the sheer authority of it. Jiraiya stared at Naruto, who was blinking in confusion, unaware of the cosmic event that had just occurred in his own navel. The sage's jovial mask was gone, replaced by a look of profound, terrified awe. It's true, he thought, his heart hammering in his chest. It's all true. Sarutobi-sensei, what in the world did you leave in my care? The next stage of training was the Rasengan. It was the fourth Hokage's legacy, a jutsu of the highest caliber. Jiraiya demonstrated it, a swirling sphere of pure chakra humming in his palm like a captured star. It was a test of ultimate chakra control. Naruto, as expected, was a disaster. The first step, rotation, he got through sheer stubbornness, his hands raw and blistered. The second step, power, he managed with shadow clones, a brute force solution to a delicate problem. But the final step, containment, shaping the raging power into a perfect sphere, was a wall he couldn't climb. He spent days trying, his chakra flaring and dissipating, his water balloons popping with messy splashes, the rubber balls exploding violently. He sat by a river, exhausted and frustrated, a fresh rubber ball in his hand. It's impossible! He yelled at Jiraiya, who was peeking at women in a nearby hot spring. I can't get it to stay together. It just wants to explode. Then you're doing it wrong. Jiraiya called back without looking. You don't force the chakra into a shape, you guide it. You have to make it want to be a sphere, become one with the chakra, blah blah blah. His voice trailed off as a particularly interesting target came into view. Naruto slumped, defeated. Make it want to be a sphere? What does that even mean? He stared at the ball in his hand, pouring his chakra into it. He felt the wild, chaotic energy swirling, fighting against his will, desperate to burst free. It was like holding a tiny hurricane in his palm. He thought back to his fight with Niji. He had declared his destiny was his own, and in that moment, it felt like the world had agreed with him. He thought of the forest, of willing the ugly mark on Sasuke's neck to be clean. He thought of the bridge, of wishing Haku back to life. In all those moments, he wasn't forcing anything. He was deciding. A new thought, born from this strange, dawning understanding, entered his mind. He looked at the chaotic energy roiling in his hand. He stopped trying to wrestle it into a cage of chakra. Instead, he focused his will, not his power. He gave the energy a single, simple, authoritative command: be stable. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The violent, uncontrolled storm of chakra in his palm did not slowly coalesce. It simply obeyed. One moment, it was a chaotic mess threatening to detonate. The next, it was a perfect, silent sphere. The Rasengan that formed in Naruto's hand was unlike any Jiraiya had ever seen. It was not the familiar, vibrant blue. It was a sphere of pure, golden white light, the same light from the bridge. It did not hum or roar with power. It was utterly silent. It spun with impossible speed, yet it seemed perfectly still, like looking at the axle of a spinning universe. It didn't radiate heat or destructive energy. It radiated a gentle, profound warmth and a sense of absolute order. It wasn't a ball of chakra. It was a miniature, contained singularity, a pocket of pure creation held in the palm of a 12-year-old boy. Naruto stared at it, his jaw slack. Whoa! Jiraiya, his perverted antics forgotten, was on his feet, his mouth agape. He had seen Minato Namikaze, a once-in-a-generation genius, create the Rasengan. He had mastered it himself. But this was not the same jutsu. This was a divine artifact. The fourth Hokage had created a jutsu that mimicked a celestial body. His son, it seemed, had simply decided to hold one. Kid, Jiraiya whispered, his voice trembling. What did you do? I don't know. Naruto said, his voice a mixture of excitement and confusion. I just told it to stop messing around. The divine Rasengan held its shape for another 10 seconds before dissolving into motes of warm light, leaving Naruto's hand completely unharmed. The rubber ball he had been holding was gone, not popped, but seemingly unmade from existence. Jiraiya walked over, his face a mask of grim seriousness. He placed a heavy hand on Naruto's shoulder. Naruto, he said, his voice low. We need to talk. About your power. The real one. The search for Tsunade led them to a grimy, sake-soaked castle town. It also led them straight to Orochimaru. The confrontation was inevitable. Orochimaru had come to make Tsunade a deal, heal his arms, rotting from the third Hokage's Reaper death seal, and he would resurrect her beloved brother and fiancé. It was a cruel, tempting offer that preyed on her deepest grief. Jiraiya and Naruto arrived just as Tsunade, torn but resolved, made her decision. She lashed out at Orochimaru, not to accept his deal, but to end him. But she was rusty. Years of drinking, gambling, and running from her past had taken their toll. Her legendary monstrous strength was still there, but her instincts were dulled, and her hemophobia, her crippling fear of blood, paralyzed her at a crucial moment. Orochimaru, accompanied by his devout follower Kabuto Yakushi, easily overpowered her. Kabuto, a medical genius in his own right, methodically severed the muscles in Tsunade's legs and arms with his chakra scalpels, leaving the legendary Sannin crippled and helpless on the ground. Such a shame, Tsunade, Orochimaru hissed, his rotting arms held uselessly at his sides. You could have had them back. Now I will simply kill you and take the time to find another solution. Naruto watched from the sidelines, his knuckles white. Jiraiya was fighting, but Orochimaru was using Tsunade as a human shield. He saw the look on her face, the same look of despair he had seen on Zabuza, on Neji, on Sasuke. It was the look of someone who had given up. He saw her blood on the ground, and her terrified, paralyzed expression. This was the woman everyone said was supposed to be the next Hokage. The strongest kunoichi in the world. And she was broken. A fire ignited in Naruto's chest. Not the Kyuubi's rage. This was a righteous, protective anger. The Hokage was a symbol. The Hokage protected everyone. This was what the old man had died for. He would not let that legacy be broken here. He drew on his chakra, but he wasn't reaching for the fox. He was reaching for the deep, quiet ocean of power inside him. He remembered the feeling of forming the Rasengan, the sense of absolute command. He formed a standard blue Rasengan in his hand. It felt weak, chaotic, like a cheap copy compared to the real thing. But it would have to do. He charged forward. Get away from her! He roared. Kabuto turned, a dismissive sneer on his face. You again? A gnat trying to challenge a dragon. He easily sidestepped Naruto's clumsy charge and slapped his hand away, dispelling the Rasengan. He then jabbed a precise finger into the center of Naruto's chest, aiming for his heart. Naruto felt a sharp, piercing pain as Kabuto's chakra scalpel sliced through his chest muscle, stopping just shy of his heart. The attack should have killed him, but as the blade of chakra touched the outer membrane of his heart, it hit a wall. A wall of gentle, golden white light. The Genesis Mandate, in its passive self-preservation mode, refused to let its vessel die. The chakra scalpel, a tool of destruction, dissolved into nothingness upon contact with the energy of creation. Naruto was sent flying backward, gasping, but alive. Impossible! Kabuto breathed, staring at his hand. He knew his jutsu. He had aimed perfectly. The boy should be dead. Naruto struggled to his feet, clutching his chest. He could feel the wound knitting itself closed at an incredible rate. He looked at Tsunade, who was staring at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had seen the attack. She knew what it should have done. A Hokage never gives up, Naruto gasped, forcing himself to stand tall. A Hokage protects everyone. Isn't that right, Grandma Tsunade? He wasn't just shouting words. He was making a declaration. As he spoke, he consciously tapped into the Genesis Mandate. He didn't know how, he just did. It was as natural as breathing. His voice resonated with that same prophetic power it had in the arena against Neji. The words hit Tsunade not as an insult, but as a lightning bolt to her soul. She saw flashes of her grandfather, the first Hokage. She saw her brother, Nawaki, proudly declaring he would be Hokage. She saw her lover, Dan, sharing that same dream. Their faces, once shrouded in the fog of grief and blood, were suddenly crystal clear, smiling, encouraging her. The crippling fear of blood, the trauma that had haunted her for decades, was washed away in a wave of pure, absolute confidence that emanated from the boy before her. Her eyes, which had been clouded with despair, blazed with their old fire. Naruto, meanwhile, was forming another Rasengan. This time, he didn't fight it. He commanded it. Be stable. Be strong. Be a shield. The Rasengan in his hand flared, not blue, but a brilliant, divine white. It was smaller than the one he'd made before, more compressed, radiating an aura of undeniable authority. He wasn't aiming for Orochimaru or Kabuto. He was aiming for the ground. With a roar that was both a battle cry and a prayer, he charged forward and slammed the divine Rasengan into the earth at Tsunade's feet. There was no explosion. No shockwave. No crater. There was only a silent, blinding flash of white light. The earth itself was transmuted. From the point of impact, the ground reshaped itself. It wasn't wood style. Wood style coerces nature, forcing trees to grow. This was different. The very soil and stone were rewritten, their molecular structure reordered. A massive, intricate wall of pearl-white, crystalline wood erupted from the ground, soaring 30 feet into the air. It wasn't rough and bark-like. It was smooth as polished marble, glowing with a soft, internal luminescence, and humming with a quiet, life-giving energy. It formed a perfect, semicircular rampart, shielding Tsunade, Shizen, and a stunned Jiraiya. Orochimaru and Kabuto stared, their minds unable to comprehend what they were seeing. One moment, they were about to kill a Sannin. The next, they were facing a holy edifice that seemed to have sprung from the pages of a forgotten religion. Behind the wall, Tsunade pushed herself to her feet. The muscles Kabuto had severed were completely healed. Her hemophobia was gone, replaced by a fierce, burning resolve. She looked at Naruto, who was panting, leaning against the glowing wall he had just willed into existence. She wasn't just reminded of Nawaki and Dan. They had dreamed of becoming Hokage. This boy, this impossible, ridiculous, knucklehead brat, he didn't just dream it. He was it. He was the living, breathing embodiment of the will of fire, the principle of protecting one's comrades and one's home. Her belief, shattered for decades, was not just restored. It was reforged in the light of a miracle, stronger and more absolute than ever before. She placed a hand on the warm, crystalline wood. Jiraiya, she said, her voice clear and strong for the first time in years. Get the kid back. It's my turn. She vaulted over the wall, her body radiating killing intent, her eyes blazing. The legendary Sannin, the slug queen Tsunade, was back. And she had found something new to believe in, something worth fighting for. The pursuit was a frantic, desperate chase through the suffocatingly dense forests of the Land of Fire. Each member of the Sasuke retrieval squad pushed themselves to their absolute limit, their bodies screaming in protest, their chakra reserves dwindling to fumes. One by one, they had fallen away, sacrificing themselves to delay the sound for Orochimaru's elite guard, buying precious seconds for Naruto to catch up to the one person who mattered. Choji against Jirobo. Neji against Kidamaru. Kiba against Sakan and Yukon. Shikamaru against Taiyuya. Each had faced an opponent far beyond their level, each had pushed past their breaking point, and each now lay on the forest floor, their fate uncertain. The weight of their sacrifice was a physical burden on Naruto's shoulders, propelling him forward with a grim, frantic energy. He finally burst through the tree line, his lungs burning, and skidded to a halt. The sight before him stole the breath he had left. He was standing on the head of a colossal stone statue, a grim-faced likeness of Hashirama Senju, the first Hokage. Across a roaring waterfall that fed the valley below, an equally massive statue of Madara Uchiha stared back, its face locked in an eternal, stony challenge. This was the final valley, the site of the legendary battle that had shaped the shinobi world. It was a place of endings, a graveyard of a friendship so powerful it had torn the world apart. The air was thick with the ghosts of their power, a somber, oppressive weight, and in the center of the river, standing on the water's surface, was Sasuke. He wasn't the Sasuke Naruto knew. The right side of his body was covered in the angry black markings of the curse seal, which had flared to its second state. His skin was a dark, ashen gray. His hair had grown long and wild, a pale lavender color. A grotesque, hand-like wing sprouted from his back, and his eyes, visible even from a distance, glowed with a malevolent, yellow light. He looked like a demon, a creature of hate and power. "You're late, Naruto," Sasuke said, his voice a distorted, gravelly version of its own, echoing with a chilling lack of emotion. "Sasuke, what happened to you?" Naruto asked, his voice trembling. He wasn't looking at his rival. He was looking at a monster wearing his friend's face. "Your body. Orochimaru gave me this power," Sasuke stated flatly. "This is what I need to kill him. To kill Itachi. You wouldn't understand. You've been alone since the beginning. You have no idea what it's like to lose everything." The words were a physical blow, striking at the core of Naruto's identity, at the loneliness he had fought so hard to overcome. But this time, the sting was different. He looked at Sasuke, at the hate twisting his features, at the dark power corrupting his very being, and he felt not just anger, but a deep, profound pity. "You're wrong," Naruto said, his voice quiet but firm. "I do know what it's like. But that's why I'm not going to let you go. I won't let you throw away the bonds we have." The battle began, a clash of two boys bound by a complex knot of rivalry, friendship, and shared pain. It was a brutal, desperate affair. Sasuke was faster, stronger, and more ruthless than Naruto had ever seen him. His movements were predatory, his fireballs black and tinged with the cursed seal's malice. Naruto, fueled by the Kyuubi's chakra, met him head-on, their fists and feet a blur of orange and black. They were evenly matched, a perfect stalemate of borrowed demonic power and corrupted, hateful strength. They crashed against the stone cliffs, tore up the water's surface, and their roars of effort were drowned out by the thunder of the waterfall. During a brief lull, as they stood panting on opposite sides of the river, Naruto felt a familiar, insidious thought begin to bloom in the back of his mind. It was a whisper from the Genesis mandate, the divine power that now lay coiled in his soul. The power was a tool of creation, of order, of life. And Sasuke's state was a perversion of all those things. The curse seal was a cancer on his soul, a chaotic, destructive force. The mandate, in its fundamental desire to heal and restore, presented Naruto with a solution. It wasn't a voice. It was a feeling, a sudden, blinding clarity of possibility. An intuitive understanding of the mechanics of the soul. "You don't have to fight him," the understanding whispered. "You can save him." Right now, Naruto felt a blueprint form in his mind, a sequence of metaphysical actions as clear as any hand seal. He could see the curse seal not as a tattoo, but as a parasitic construct of chakra latched onto Sasuke's own network. He could see the hatred for Itachi not as an emotion, but as a corrupted data cluster in Sasuke's spiritual core. He could reach out. He could channel the Genesis mandate, the power of a true god, and perform a kind of divine surgery. He could simply erase it all. He could unravel the cursed seal, transmuting its malevolent chakra into harmless, neutral energy. He could pluck the thorns of hatred from Sasuke's heart, leaving only the good memories, the fondness for Team 7. He could smooth over the cracks of trauma, rewrite the pain of the Uchiha massacre into a distant, painless memory. He could force Sasuke to be whole again. He could make him come back to the village, make him smile, make him be his friend, his rival, just like he was before. He had the power to edit reality, and Sasuke's reality was broken. He could fix it. He could restore factory settings. The sheer, intoxicating allure of the idea was overwhelming. All this fighting, all this pain, the sacrifices of their friends lying broken in the forest, it could all be over in an instant. He could have his friend back. He took a step forward, his hand beginning to glow with a soft, golden white light. The Genesis mandate surged, eager to perform its primary function, to create, to heal, to restore order from chaos. Sasuke saw the light and tensed, mistaking it for a new, powerful jutsu. "What now, Naruto? Another trick?" Naruto looked at Sasuke's snarling, hate-filled face. He saw the power promised by the mandate, a clean, painless victory. he would win. He would save Sasuke. Their bond would be restored, and in that moment of absolute clarity, a wave of cold, abject horror washed over Naruto. A bond restored? No. A bond forged in the fires of rivalry, laughter, and shared experience could not be restored with a divine sleight of hand. If he did this, if he reached into Sasuke's soul and removed the parts of him that he didn't like, the bond wouldn't be real. It would be a lie. Sasuke wouldn't be his friend because he chose to be. He would be his friend because Naruto had programmed him to be. He would be a puppet, a hollow doll whose strings were pulled by Naruto's own selfish desire not to be lonely. It would be the ultimate violation. The ultimate act of disrespect. It would be a confirmation of everything Sasuke had accused him of Naruto not understanding him at all. To take away Sasuke's pain, his hatred, his free will, it would be to kill the real Sasuke just as surely as if he had run him through with a Chidori. The golden light on Naruto's hand sputtered and died. He looked at Sasuke, and his expression changed. The desperate pleading was gone, replaced by a new, heavy resolve. He finally understood the terrifying responsibility that came with his power. It wasn't just the power to create. It was the power to unmake a person's very self. It was a temptation greater than any Orochimaru could offer, and he had to be the one to reject it. I see, Naruto said, his voice heavy with a maturity that sounded alien coming from him. I get it now, Sasuke. Sasuke's brow furrowed. Get what, you loser? Why you have to go? Naruto said, meeting his gaze. I don't like it. I hate it. But your pain, your hate, it's yours. It's part of you. If I just took that away from you, then you wouldn't be you anymore. And the guy who came back to the village wouldn't be my rival. Sasuke was taken aback, his aggressive posture faltering for a fraction of a second. This wasn't the usual bond speech. This was something else, something that bordered on understanding. So, Naruto continued clenching his fists as the red, bubbling chakra of the Kyuubi began to envelop him, forming a single, shimmering tail. If I can't change your mind, and I won't force you, then I'll just have to beat you senseless and drag your stubborn ass back to the village myself. This, Sasuke understood. The flicker of confusion was replaced by a snarl. You think you can stop me? I have to try. Naruto roared, the Kyuubi's power now a roaring inferno. The battle of ideals was over. The battle of strength began anew, but the nature of their fight had fundamentally changed. It was no longer a clash of two boys. It was a battle of two philosophies, amplified by supernatural power. Sasuke's attacks were fueled by the curse seal, by his hatred. His black Chidori shrieked with malice, a blade of pure, selfish ambition. When it struck the cliffside, the rock didn't just break, it seemed to rot, to decay, turning black and brittle. His chakra felt cold, empty, a spiritual void that consumed everything it touched. It was the power of a black hole, drawing everything inward to serve its own purpose. Naruto's power was the opposite. He was wrapped in the Kyuubi's demonic chakra cloak, a raging torrent of destruction. But it was different now. Woven into the violent red was the faint, unmistakable lattice of golden white light from the Genesis mandate. The Kyuubi's chakra was still hateful, still destructive, but it was now being filtered through Naruto's newfound resolve. It was no longer just the rage of a caged demon, it was the righteous fury of a guardian. His chakra felt hot, vibrant, and overwhelmingly present. It was the power of a star, radiating outward, imposing its will upon the world around it. His punches didn't just break the stone, they carried the weight of his desire to save Sasuke, a conceptual force that made Sasuke feel like he was fighting against the world itself. Their blows shook the valley. The giant statues of their predecessors began to crack and crumble under the strain of a battle that echoed their own. Sasuke, feeling Naruto's power, a power that was just as monstrous as his own, yet felt so fundamentally different, was driven to a new level of desperation. I will not lose to you, he screamed, the curse seal spreading further, his monstrous wing growing larger. I will sever all my bonds. That is the only way to gain the power I need. He gathered all of his dark chakra into his left hand. A sphere of black lightning crackled into existence, screaming with a sound like tearing reality. A Chidori fueled by Orochimaru's dark gift and his own bottomless hatred. Naruto, seeing this, knew this was the end. He drew on the Kyuubi's power, pouring it into his right hand. The fox's chakra swirled, raw and violent. But Naruto's will, his conscious choice to respect Sasuke's path even as he fought against it, guided the energy. He wasn't just making a Rasengan. He was making a statement. I will not let you go. The Rasengan that formed was a volatile, terrifying thing. It was a sphere of deep, violet-red chakra, shot through with veins of black malice from the Kyuubi, but at its very core, at the point where Naruto's own will was strongest, pulsed a single, brilliant spark of golden white light. It was a promise of salvation hidden within a storm of destruction. They charged, two comets of opposing ideologies set on a collision course. Sasuke, Naruto, their signature jutsus met in the space between the two crumbling statues. Chidori versus Rasengan. For a moment there was no sound. Only light. A blinding sphere of black and violet energy expanded, swallowing them both, swallowing the waterfall, swallowing everything. The sound came a second later, a cataclysmic explosion that ripped the valley apart. The stone heads of Hashirama and Madara, which had stood for generations, shattered and fell into the raging river below. When the light faded, the rain began to fall. Naruto lay unconscious on the ground, the Kyuubi's chakra cloak gone, leaving him battered and bruised. A few feet away, Sasuke stood over him, breathing heavily, his own curse seal receding, leaving him in his base form, his Konoha headband lying on the wet rock between them. He had won. He had proven he was stronger. He had severed the bond. But it was a hollow victory. He looked down at Naruto, at the boy who had chased him all this way, who had matched his power, who had looked into the abyss of his soul and, instead of turning away in disgust, had simply refused to let him fall. He remembered Naruto's words, "Your pain, it's yours." For the first time, he felt that someone had seen the entirety of his ugliness and had not tried to fix him, but had simply refused to abandon him. It was a form of acceptance more profound than any he had ever known, and it terrified him. He could kill Naruto now. It would be the final, definitive act. The last bond severed. It was what Orochimaru would expect. It was what Itachi's path seemed to demand. He raised his hand, chakra gathering for a final, simple strike. He looked at Naruto's peaceful, unconscious face. He couldn't do it. Killing him now would not be an act of gaining power. It would be an act of running away from the one person in the world who seemed to understand him on a level he couldn't comprehend. With a growl of frustration at his own weakness, he turned away. "I'm not doing what you want," he whispered, to Naruto, to Itachi, to himself. "I'll get this power my own way." He walked away, leaving Naruto to the rain and the ruins, disappearing into the woods on the path to Orochimaru, to the darkness. When Kakashi arrived hours later, guided by Pakken, he found a scene of utter devastation. He knelt by Naruto's side, a deep sense of failure and sorrow washing over him. He had lost another student to the darkness. He gently lifted Naruto, preparing to take him back to the village. As he did, he noticed Naruto's right hand was loosely clenched. He carefully pried the fingers open. Lying in Naruto's palm, pristine and untouched by the rain and the mud, was Sasuke's Konoha headband, the metal plate gleaming, a deep, clean scratch across the leaf symbol. Naruto returned to Konoha not just defeated, but changed. The mission was a failure. Sasuke was gone. But within that failure was a quiet, terrible victory. He had faced the ultimate temptation of his divine power, and had chosen humanity. He had looked God in the face and chosen to remain a man. He stood in the hospital room with Sakura and Jiraiya, the weight of his choice settling upon him. Sakura was crying. Jiraiya was grim. Naruto just looked out the window, his gaze distant. He had made a new promise. Not just to Sakura, but to himself. He would get stronger. Strong enough to stand beside Sasuke as an equal. Strong enough to beat him, to save him, without destroying his soul. Strong enough to drag him back from the darkness, not by divine right, but by his own two hands. The burden of a god had been offered to him, and he had refused it. Now, he would carry the much heavier burden of a friend.